panel. We have today in the room with us Sonny Hereford, who is the organiser of the Huntsville St. Patrick's Day Parade. And we have Christian Bolden, who's a board member of the African American Irish Diaspora Network, Conor Martinez, who's Chief of Staff for Mayor Eric Adams' Community Affairs Unit, and Teresa Tobin, who's the Chief of Interagency Operations in NYPD. And I think we're joined on Zoom. We are with the Honourable Lois Reckitt, who's the representative of the Maine State Legislature and the Vice Chair of the Maine Irish Heritage Centre in Portland. So thank you very much. I'm going to sit with you guys. So I think, we've been touching on our theme all morning, which is building bridges to a diverse America. And I think it's something that, in one sense, Irish America has struggled with since we've come, to this country as immigrants. A week before he died, we had Mick Maloney and Lenny Sloan up in the museum, and they did their Roads Diverged, tour. And Lenny started off the night by saying, we'll be talking about some uncomfortable things, but this is a safe space. And I think, that's kind of the spirit that we want to go forward in. There's been flashpoints between Irish America and other groups in America since the founding of the colonies, and certainly since independence. And Dr. Keneally's work, touches on a lot of that. But I think our collective personal and professional experience also kind of touches on that. So particularly, I think somebody, Sonny, like yourself, an African-American man, one of the first students to be going to an integrated school, and then in adulthood, the first student in Alabama. So and lived to tell the tale. And then, became one of the main organisers of the St. Patrick's Day Parade. So how does that happen?
Well, so I'm a Notre Dame alumnus. I graduated in '79, came back home to Huntsville, Alabama in '86, and started the Notre Dame Club of Alabama in '92. Well, there had been a St. Patrick's Day Parade in Huntsville, and since I had started the club in the fall of '92, '93, I thought, well, the Fighting Irish ought to be in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. So I started going and volunteering to help organize the parade and so forth. Well, unfortunately, in '95, the parade organizer passed away, and I had been taking my laptop to the meetings back then. So the lady who was the sponsor of the parade, who, by the way, was Ellen McAnally from Galway, and she assumed that I was an organized person, so she asked me to take over the parade, and I did, and I ran it for about 14 or 15 years, and then the Irish Society of Northern Alabama was formed, and I went to them and I said, look, you guys ought to be doing this, not me, and so I asked them to understudy me for the year 2011, and then they took the parade over in 2012, but I ran it from '96 through 2011, so 16 years, and kept the parade going. A lot of people have said that they didn't think the parade would have continued if I had.
Without your intervention. And, when we were preparing for this panel, Sonny, you were saying that you often received pushback from your own community then of African Americans. Like, why are you involved in this Irish?
Exactly, yeah, it's something, and I'm not sure that everyone is aware of it, and it's not just Irish, but it's white people in general. If you're a black person, and see, I integrated the schools at the age of 6, and I'm comfortable in any audience, but not everybody necessarily appreciates that. And sometimes I would get some pushback from my own community about being so heavily involved in something so Irish. So.
Yeah. And Christian, I guess you can speak to that too, that, I think we should see it as an opportunity to grow, rather than, and this is a challenge, I think, for Irish America. We're a dying kind of demographic, we're an aging demographic, and so to see these opportunities for inclusion as something that's positive instead of something that's diluting our culture.
Yeah, and excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes.
Now you're awake.
Yeah, there you go. But no, you're touching on a very important point. We at the African American Irish Diaspora, that's something that we promote, particularly in the African American community. A little known fact, more than 40% or close to 40% of African Americans actually have Irish heritage, right? So the lineage is already there. It just really needs to be illuminated. We've tried to do that through 3 chief areas, right? Social justice, arts and culture, and entrepreneurship, right? And I think we really are in an interesting time in the United States, kind of where the social climate is, right? Coming on the back of an environment that's really promoted nativism, right? And I think this climate in particular really creates a unique opportunity and a necessity for us to reach across, coming to various communities with an attitude of open-mindedness, of impartiality, of curiosity, right? And bringing that to the table and saying, look, we really want to engage with you. We want to learn more about you. What can we do to facilitate your effort for enfranchisement, right? And that's what we're looking to do, and we're looking to connect with anyone. But of course, for us, being a conduit to the African American community and harnessing the spirit of Frederick Douglass is something that we're really excited about. So yeah, I think we're in a good space right now to really navigate exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's it's happening in popular culture. We saw the pushback with Morgan Bullock when she kind of went viral on TikTok for Irish dancing, and people pushed back against that, and then Riverdance gave her a job. So, we're learning. Lois, you've done some outreach at your centre with refugees, as we have in the museum too. We partner a lot with the Refugee Centre because, of course, particularly during the Great Hunger, Irish people came here, with nothing. And so can you speak a little bit about that, and also your outreach to the LGBTQ community?
Yes, we've tried to open our center, which has one of the really good meeting spaces, and we have allowed it or asked it to be used for groups who have emigrated recently. We have a pretty large immigrant community in Maine, and particularly in Portland and Lewiston, and I think that we have tried to open our hearts and our space to the people who need a place to congregate and don't have such a thing themselves. So we are trying to do more of that. The thing about the LGBTQ community is interesting for me because I'm a member of that community, but we're starting to think about the integration of the two parades, the St. Patrick's Day parade, to try to encourage and people from the LGBTQ community to identify and march in the St. Patrick's Day parade, and vice versa. So I'm going to be reaching out to the Equality Maine people and to the people who run the Pride Parade to try to have an identified group in the Pride Parade, which is pretty large. I'd say it's about the size of the St. Patrick's Day parade every year. And in the process of doing that, and in the process of my being in the legislature, I had an occasion to try to memorialize St. Patrick's Day a couple of years ago, and I got everybody in the entire legislature, 181 people, to sign a piece to do that. And that sort of started the impetus that we have now started an Irish caucus in the Maine state legislature. And there are already close to 35 people identified with that group. And so we're hoping to do some more activities there as well as the Scotch Irish, who came to Portland even earlier than the traditional Irish. And it's been interesting because I myself am Scotch Irish, but I never thought of myself that way until I tried to help those people who were identifying in that manner to get some recognition as well. So we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. It's an interesting difficulty sometimes. We're in a very, very white state, although our immigrant communities are helping us with that problem. But I think that it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's very likely we may have the first African-American woman Speaker of the House in Maine next year. If that happens, it'll be interesting to see if we can make some more moves in that direction.
And Conor, you have a mixed background too when we were talking, and I just happened to talk to a few people at the break, and we were saying in some ways Ireland has moved on a little bit ahead of America, like the Staten Island Parade don't allow LGBTQ. We've done a lot of work with Brendan Fay in our museum on different aspects. And so, from the mayor's point of view, what's going on in New York, and we'll talk with you, Teresa, about that, because the Irish demographic, we used to, run civil servants and all of those kind of public jobs, and that demographic is changing. And so in tough times, as we've had these riots and the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff, how are you negotiating that tension?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wanted to thank the Irish Echo for bringing us all here. This is a great event, great day. I've learned so much. But as far as the city's concerned, I think there's a lot of work that can still be done as far as bringing different communities together, whether it's Irish or, in New York City, we have dozens and dozens of different communities that we have to do outreach to and make sure that we're serving everyone equally. And so, you know, with the LGBTQ community on Staten Island, when it comes to the Pride Parade, that's a very contentious issue that happens year after year. But like you said, the civil service, and I'll let, you know, the chief take it from with the police department point of view, but the city's changed over time. And Irish prominence in the city has changed as a result of it. My family was involved in politics, still involved in politics, but you know, it's different and it's changed, and that's okay and that's good because the city changes and the people who serve the city should reflect that.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that is really remarkable is how the lasting impact of the Irish culture in those different services. So, you know, in NYPD, whether it's of the bagpipe, I forget the name right now is escaping me embarrassingly, but you know, whether it's NYP, FDNY,
yeah, pipes and drums,
exactly, and those are there regardless of, you know, the funeral, regardless of the background, regardless of the culture and society, not society, but regardless of the culture of the person who passed, and I think that is really remarkable. The brotherhood, the family aspect. My upbringing was very much family focused, and my Irish side, both sides, but my Irish side was very large and very family centered. And I think that is Irish culture in a lot of ways, communal. Yeah. And it's good to see that is going to have a lasting impact. Now, who knows if they have less and less bagpipe players, we'll see. But, you know, as of now, it seems like that is having a lasting impact, which is really beautiful, I think, as far as Irish culture having a lasting impact on the city. Yeah.
And so, Teresa, talk to us about that, you know, how NYPD is changing. And
Sure. Well, to Connor's point, the NYPD is now a majority department. For myself, I'm one of 5, and 4 out of the 5 of us followed my father's footsteps into law enforcement. He forgave my sister because she married one. But I think that's part of the legacy of the Irish and the police department. I think being a member of any civil service, and I think public service is extremely important to Irish Americans, and I think that's something they brought over with my grandmother really focused on education and public service. But I think with the NYPD now, that legacy is not as prominent. You know, every generation wants to do better than the generation before. And I could see that from my grandparents who were from Ireland to my parents. We did better than our parents. But I think that part of that has been a huge outreach by the NYPD recruitment to get the city to reflect more of the population throughout the city.
And Christian, can you talk to us a little bit about the types of education you were saying, which is so key to having this, you know, more open dialogue between both Irish America and like disparate groups within and without?
Yeah, so, excuse me, what's interesting is I think that there is a hunger, there is a desire for communities connect. I think people still see kinship with people who are like them, but still see kinship from others who are unlike them. I think that really is what the American spirit is born out of, right? I think again, getting back to some of the macro level factors, there's a lot of anxiety amongst people, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. We're dealing with inflation. Gas prices are unbelievable. They have mothers in here who I'm sure, I'm a young father myself. We were trying to get baby formula. That was a challenge, right? And when these things happen, you kind of retreat to your corner. And we've seen that kind of harness for political expedience, unfortunately. And yet, when people walk outside and they look in their neighbors' faces, they love their neighbors. People who live next door to them, have keys to their home, spend times with their children. They go to church with these people. They're in grocery stores with these people. It is a larger community, right? So I think, again, getting back to kind of what we're saying in terms of that educational piece, the environment is ripe for just what we're talking about, right? Which is looking across various communities and saying we have so much in common. Earlier you were talking about the fiddle and the banjo, much like my friend here, Sonny. I'm a son of the South as well. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. So if anybody understands those instruments, it's me, right? But you may not understand that on its surface because, of course, the color of my skin may not necessarily lend itself to that. But again, there's so many commonalities that we have that I think we can, when we start to have dialogue, when we start to have conversation, when we come to the table with that open mind, that open heart, and that curiosity about what exactly we do have in common, so many elements socially and otherwise are there. I just think we have to be very mindful about not conveniently reducing ourselves to hanging on to that pole and doing what we do. And again, so many people are dealing with so many things, and we're fortunate in this room to be able to come somewhere like this and talk about these things. But when we leave here, we definitely have to be committed to to addressing these sorts of challenges. Yeah.
And Sonny, like you did that on the ground for decades with this parade, you know, that I'm sure sometimes difficult to get people, you know, to agree to march, or different groups wanting to maybe take over. You know, one of the things the Irish do very well is argue amongst ourselves too. So you know, there's a lot of power struggles.
So our parade started in '78, and before I was involved with it, and it became famous because it was the smallest parade in the country. We had 18 marchers, and no vehicles, 18 marchers, and I have a picture that only has 17 people because one of them had to sneak away from work and didn't want to be in the picture. You know? But because it became famous, it actually grew very rapidly. And most recently, we have a mile-and-a-half course for the parade, route for the parade. And I can tell you, we stage in a large parking lot. And when the first entry leaves and goes out, they return before the last entry has left. So our parade is over a mile-and-a-half long. So no, we don't have any trouble anymore. And and very good diversity in our parade.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and Lois, you know, we saw earlier on with Natalie's work in Minnesota too. We do learn so much from each other, and it just enriches it to be exposed. And as Christian said, like the similarity, you know, I suppose in one way the Irish is an indigenous, you know, kind of culture. We have very kind of sacred music and dance, which would be very similar to African music and dance, you know. And how are you finding in Maine with allowing, you know, these refugees from other countries and cultures to use your space, you know, that they're bringing something to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting because when our center is the former cathedral that the Irish built in Portland, that was decommissioned and then given to the city, and we got it from the city. So it's a huge landmark in the city, St. Dominic's. And what was interesting was one of the things that caused me hesitation personally when I was asked to become involved. I was aware of the center, but I said to the person who was trying to recruit me to be on the board there, I said, you know, I'm not Catholic. And she said, we don't care. You know how to run things. Great. I could do that. I just don't happen to be Catholic. You know, I come from a family where my dad got excommunicated for marrying my mother. That's a common story, I think, in our history that people don't talk about much. But I have found the community so incredibly welcoming that I think, you know, we have an open-hearted policy, and I think that people sense that, and hopefully will reach out even more in both directions to the immigrant communities in the city, because I think one of the things it's difficult. We have to be careful how we talk about the fact that we too were immigrants, because the situation is very different today, and very different for many of the people who are currently immigrating. I mean, there's some reasons, mostly poverty and hunger, that caused the immigrations of the Irish, but the things that cause it today are more likely to be war and serious threats for personal safety and all those kinds of things that come from the currently immigrating communities from Somalia and Rwanda and these kinds of places coming out of really different circumstances. And I think it's very healthy for both sides of those discussions to understand and appreciate the differences, but the similarities between our experiences. And I think that and it gets tricky, you know, because the African-American experience is quite different, because the impetus for arrival was not, gee, I need to go somewhere, or I want to go somewhere. It was, you know, people being wrenched out of their lives and taken here. So it's so complex that I think it could put a whole course together to try to understand the various parts of the immigration history.
Conor, I know, I'm not putting you on the spot, but politically or diplomatically, there are some Irish Americans embrace the whole white slavery myth, and we work hard at the museum, and other centres do too, I know, what Lois just said, coming as an enslaved person is not the same thing as indentured servitude, and, so how politically or diplomatically, do you think, particularly for New York, I suppose, with so many different groups, how is that playing out in modern communities?
Well, that's an interesting question. No. So I think the best answer is, and this has to do with a lot of that goes on. I think people try to mystify or glorify or romanticize their past to make their present more glorified, and not glorified, but coming from trying to compare yourself to something and see where you are now. You're trying to show the rise and and things like that. So I think just being truthful and honest but respectful is always how you should go about those issues and talk about those different positions. And, education is the key, which is a great part of what the museum does, and educational facilities, systems throughout the country and throughout the world to make sure that we're shining light on the inaccuracies of what we've been told and what our grandparents told our parents, and then how that kind of trickles down and that becomes law. Those oral histories become law in a lot of ways. And just real quickly to go back to that music piece, I think music is such a great way to build that bridge to kind of go back to the theme if in a diverse America. And my family, sorry to talk about my family so much, but my family is really into music and Irish music, and I mutter some Christy Moore every now and then. And but my cousins are big partiers, right? Yeah. And so they'll invite all their friends over and we're from New York, so it's a very diverse background. Yeah. But people will be rocking out to everything, and it builds a relationship, camaraderie, and I think that's a great way to build to level the playing field in a lot of ways and get people to enjoy each other's company. And Irish music is so great and rich and fun. Not to go back again, I'm sorry, but someone said there was a pub anywhere you go across the world. Yeah. And one of my favorite Irish songs is about that, how wherever you go Irish around find an Irish pub. And I love that. And I just think that that's a really great way to bridge that gap. Yeah.
Well, and Larry Kerwin's recent musical Paradise Square, I think bridged that to, unfortunately its run ended early, but it was a fantastic story about, the Civil War era with African Americans and Irish. And so Teresa, sum up for us where Irish America is today and how we can help bridge these gaps and have more diversity and inclusion.
So, I think that you all know that the NYPD has a huge Irish presence in it, but I'll just leave on this note. We had Kelly, and we had Bratton, and we had O'Neill, and we had Shea, and now we have Keyshawn Sewell. So I think that's part of leading the way. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I think we're out of time, but thank you, panel. That was very good. We could, be here all day, but I think, actually all of the panels have kind of touched on this, because to be able to build sustainability, we do have to include more. And it's, between Jerry Adams and Brexit and all these things, it's an opportunity for us to add to our community instead of to, take away from it. So I think we're very hopeful for Irish America. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.